Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have Jordan with us, and she is an ISFJ. And today we will be contrasting ISFJ and INFJ. She is a relationship coach at Restored and Rewired, and I will have her links down below. And she is a very warm human being. Like, the first thing you will notice about her is that her voice will hit you with its very warm demeanor. So hello, Jordan.
Hi.
I was wondering, what do you think are the differences between INFJ and ISFJ?
That's a good one because I also find a lot of commonalities between the two. I guess the first thing off the top of my head would be how much more introspective, introspective, I guess I should say, that they are. They have a really uncanny way of knowing things that maybe normal people wouldn't know. Much broader view, a scope, a frame of mind, I guess, where I feel like ISFJs tend to be much more narrow focused. Yeah, those are some of the first two I can think of.
Jordan, that was a great summary on ISFJ versus INFJ. I was wondering, for yourself, how did you know you were ISFJ instead of INFJ?
That's actually that's a good question because I think I always tested ISFJ as an adult, but when I was a teenager, I actually tested INFJ. So I guess it was through I know, right? I guess it was through going on my own personal search and diving into the cognitive functions myself, and trying to see all of the differences in my own personal life from SI and NI. And then it became evidently clear that I was not an intuitive, although I do prefer my intuitive function. I'm very close with it. It's like a little baby. It's my precious little baby, but I do not have it as a strength.
That is so interesting. Jordan, one of your strengths is your ability to attach symbols to people. Like, you're good at knowing what they like, and you're like, this person is like gummy bears, or like you'll have an object associated with them. And I was wondering, could you maybe exemplify that with me? I've never heard you compare me to a symbol, so I was wondering, what symbols do you attach to Joyce?
I don't know. I would have to think about that. I think that you're a sweet, sweet soul. I like anytime I hear your voice, I hear the warmth and the melodic sound of the ebbs and flows of it. So anytime I hear your voice, it's very distinct, and I just think sweetness.
Wow. Oh, you're gonna make me tear up, Jordan. You
And
have the
you have an innocence about you too that I really love. I'm not even sure how old you are, but I feel like there's just this whimsy about you that's very just innocent and sweet.
That's so nice of you. Maybe it's my intuitive airheadedness, that whimsiness. I'm kidding.
I don't know.
But I think, Jordan, you have like the most melodic voice ever. Like, I find that SFJs, the FJ is already melodic, but with the SFJ, it increases it. I don't know why. For my MBTI instructor, when I was taking the official MBTI, she was an ESFJ, and her voice was the prettiest voice I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, it reminds me of Jordan's.
Oh, so sweet. Yes, the ESFJs I know in my life also have that very, like, it's like almost like a mom's tone, like something that you would imagine a very motherly person to have. It's very nurturing and very accommodating and like, come closer and let me take care of you kind of voice.
That's so true. Um, I totally agree. And so, Jordan, you mentioned how INFJs, they kind of like have a broader perspective. What do you mean by that when you say that?
Yeah, I think naturally, and I wants to look deeper into the implications of things, and so they take a broader perspective and just trying to gain multiple viewpoints. Kind of like think of it as like maybe like a drone or a bird's eye view. So like they take in a broader scope. They're looking much further down the line, where SI or specifically ISFJs are looking more at like what's right in front of them and then picking apart all the little details and the pieces that they see right directly in front of them. So
That's a talent in itself too, to be able to notice the present, or like to notice the reality around you. Because sometimes NI will detach itself, and it'll be several layers, kind of detached from reality as it's looking at reality. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
type of beauty in not having that detachment that NI DOMs have.
Yeah,
And
I definitely see that a lot. I was raised by an INFJ, my mother, and there were so many things that I admired about her that maybe I didn't see until I was an adult, because I was always so practical and detail focused, and I felt like she missed a lot of the details. But now looking back, as a mom myself, I recognize all of the beauty and the broader scope that she brought to things. She always wanted to expound our understanding of things, asking a lot of why questions, really trying to get a better understanding of what we were dealing with or what was going on, um, from a bigger perspective. And sometimes I know as a child it was like more over my head, because she was always very focused on like spiritual things and spiritual implications of things. But now that's something I've really grown to appreciate about her, that she's implemented into my life, where I often get caught up in the details. And so sometimes, the saying, I'm not sure which direction it goes, but I see the trees and forget the forest, you know what I mean? And so I can kind of get like nitpicky about things, where she was very easygoing and very just, she just had a broader concept of things than I did.
that is so, like, eloquently put. You're a great speaker, Jordan. Also, Jordan, there's some rustling with your
Oh,
headphones.
I'll try to like bend the wire to see if it'll like stay away from my shirt.
For
Is that better?
sure.
Or I could just hold it up, maybe. Yeah, I'll do that.
For sure. For sure.
Is that
Awesome.
better?
Yeah, that's way better.
Okay. Okay. Sorry if that messed up any audio.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's a life lesson when there are audio issues. It's kind of like, you know that you'll never have the ideal circumstance, so you just gotta work with what you have, and that's the lesson we get
Very
from
true.
audio issues. So
Yes, very true.
tell me a little bit about your experience with SI.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I could limit it to just one interview, but I definitely think that the biggest takeaway I have of SI is its need for sameness. And I mean, we know it often gets called like rigid, because we like to have a structure that is comfortable, that is repetitive, that is reliable. And so I'm very much a scheduler and a routine type of person, and I feel like that it helps create balance in my life. It helps me to prepare for things that might come up that I wasn't expecting, because everything else in my life, ideally, is is not redundant. That's not the right word. Like, but just repetitive. And it's um, I like to make things comfortable for other people in a way that feels familiar to them. So again, it's like SI is a good word for it, is repetition. Um, and let's see, what are some other things that I can think of? I think that um, yeah, familiarity is another word that I would put with it, in just creating comfort around things that just seem, yeah, I don't know. Like my mind is going blank right now.
No, that's beautiful, Jordan. You had this example of you and coffee cups and how you'll change up your coffee cup, and that's your NE coming up.
Yes, I like things to be the same so that I can. It's easier thinking. It's more practical for me, and I do like to add in little sprinkles of newness, things that are manageable, things that I can control, um, and that aren't so different that it makes me uncomfortable, but they're different enough that I get to experience something new and exciting.
That is so awesome. So the example I'm referring to is when Jordan was telling us about how she switches up her coffee mugs, and that's like her any coming to play. So it's like this manageable and amount of newness into your life, which is so cool.
Yeah, I do that with like a lot of little things. Like I said, things that I can manage personally that aren't being forced upon me, or like just really like rash changes. Those are very uncomfortable.
Yes, interesting. I guess to contrast that with myself is that I'm kind of indifferent to routines or sameness.
Mhm.
And I kind of am indifferent to anything that is repetitive. So the thing is, I might not even notice that it's going on. Like, because I'm so in my head and I'm thinking about implications and
Mm.
the scope of human nature. And I'm like, oh yeah, this physical need. Oh yeah, it'd probably be better if I regimented this.
Yes,
But
regimen,
it's
that's
like
another good word.
yeah, so maybe SI has its tiny regiments that makes it feel comfort, a sense of psychological comfort.
Mhm. I think it also has to do with a sense of physical familiarity, creating a physical appearance of something that looks similar to something else, that was comforting to you or that brought like a sense of peace. So things that are really physically abrupt or like flashy, or things that you wouldn't normally see in an everyday situation, are also very unnerving. I think to most SI people, and I think as far as we like to keep things very symmetrical. It brings a sense of balance and order to things that appears like even. So again, with that repetitivity and that sameness.
I kind of see like maybe SI takes the present and it contrasts it with its past and it tries to take something that worked in the past or that mattered in the past and to maybe recreate it in the present.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Yeah, I think that's why SI tends to be very sentimental about things and trying to recreate tradition and constructs that they were either brought up with, or things that happened in their life that really meant a lot to them.
That is so precious. You're like taking the treasures of the past and you're bringing it back.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
I've
very
been
important to me.
That's amazing. And sorry about my voice, guys. I'm sick like 24/7. I have more days where I'm sick than I'm not. So that's probably why you hear
Um,
fluctuations in my voice. Yeah. But that's so amazing. It's like you guys take treasures from the past and you bring them back so people can also experience the greatness of it too. we're like we're so indebted to you as, a society.
Aw.
To contrast your experience with my experience. So I would say that I'm kind of indifferent to the past. In fact, like I feel detached from the past. And it's more like if I'm referencing the past, it's to figure out a why of the past. So it's going like, does the past help explain something in the current? And if it doesn't, I don't take the physical concrete thing. But if it has an explanation, then I might think about it and consider it, but it's almost like it's thought fuel. The past is only useful as thought fuel, and if it doesn't provide good thought, then I am completely cut off from it.
Hmm, that's very interesting.
Yes, that's so cool that we get to contrast our thoughts. And I wanted to ask you a bit about NE. So, what is your experience of NE?
I'm very protective over my baby NE, probably a little bit too protective, little smother mother, if you will. Um, like I mentioned, it's got I really appreciate it when it's things that I can manage, things that are changes or possibilities that I haven't vetted out yet. I want them to be something that is easily controlled so that I can adapt to it as I'm comfortable. Because being that I lead with I don't adapt to change very easily. It takes me quite a while actually to warm up to like a new routine or something added to my routine. So those things have to be things that I am able to give permission to. But it is like a very sacred spot for me as far as like creativity, innovation, ingenuity. And I have a really, I don't know, it's like a very whimsical property to me, and it brings a sense of balance to my SI in that it allows me to sit and reminisce about my past and conjure up new information, things that I maybe didn't notice before. And then I fuel NE with a lot of journaling, because SI wants to be able to anchor things, and that NE creative expression comes in through my writing and my journaling. I love creative writing. I love allegories, and so I've always had a passion for writing allegorical novels and short stories, and things like that. It's a very childlike sense to it, and I mentioned that it's like a baby to me, so it's got a very childlike nature to it. And it comes out when I am interacting with my children. I can use it to allow me to go from mommy mode to playmate mode, especially with my little children, to where I can interact with them on a very childlike level. And I love also coupling that with SI and being able to take all these little details from my interactions with them and how they play and their behaviors, and keep records of them, like little totems, if you will. And that helps me a lot in my coaching, because I do a lot of parent coaching as well. So
You are a very creative person, Jordan. And I guess the ways SE throws me out of the loop is sometimes I like reacting in the moment. I'm kind of afraid of being in the moment, and I kind of need to prepare.
yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely understand that for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Do you relate to it? Do you not?
Um, I don't really have a problem being in the present. Now, if there is too many variables going on in my external environment, um, too many things changing. So I'll attribute that to like movement or sound or like sensory overload. Um, because I lead with SI, which is like a more quiet sensory function, and SE is like a really big sensory function. I feel like sometimes, things can throw me out of the present that are too big. Um, but I definitely can relate to it in the sense of like being afraid of NE changes. Um, I can find myself getting like stuck in a rut really easy, stuck in a routine, and unwilling to adapt to new and incoming information. And I have 5 children and then my husband. So, there's 7 variables in our home, and we're all different types, and so we're all going to have different needs and things. And so trying to adapt to individual people and stuff, sometimes I can be afraid of that, especially if it's not something that I'm familiar with and haven't dealt with before, or doing an interview for the first time.
This is kind of a new experience too. I hope it's a pleasant one. Although I didn't give you much preparation, so that
Oh
might
no,
like
this is fun. So this is actually good for my NE, because it's pretty laid back, and it's one-on-one, which is great. And so even though it's change and it's new, it's in a comfortable, safe setting. So this is good. This is good, and we're having fun.
oh, that's
So
great. Glad this can be a safe zone for your NE.
absolutely.
Awesome. Maybe we can talk about the FE and your experience with FE.
Okay. I see FE personally, based on like group constructs. And I like to explain that in a way it's really hard to separate FE from SI, or like it's SI flavoring sometimes. So I'd be interested to see what your takeaways are from your FE NI pairing. For me, FE and social constructs are all about like expectations in a social dynamic. And that could be anything from a small group or a one-on-one interaction, or a larger group, like say a church setting. And it's all about what is the external feedback telling me about the group needs, and what's going on in this group, and what part do I play within the group to help facilitate um, harmony or peace or everybody getting along. Um, and how do I meet individual needs and be part of the whole but still stay individual. So So yeah, it's a learning curve. So
That's so interesting. I guess my experience with the NI is it feels like a harmony cycle. So I'm looking for the cycles of harmony in relationship, or if there's no harmony in relationships, and I'm like, so why is this relationship chaotic? Or like, what social agreements need to be there for people to get along and not fight and to not blow up a relationship? So it's like seeing harmony as a abstract cycle and seeing how to maintain the good parts of relationships. And it's kind of like what is necessary to make things work between people in a way that they get along and they don't have to fight. Like, is it the tone of voice that makes people irritated at each other? Or is it the way that they talk to each other? Is it that one person likes acts of service and the other likes words of affirmation? And if you guys knew about that, then you guys would get along more. But it's kind of seeing harmony as a cycle that goes up or a cycle that goes down. And feeling the big picture impact of the harmony or lack of thereof around you, if that makes sense in any way.
Yeah, and I love the way that you're looking at it from a more abstract and intentional perspective, like looking for the intent and, the whys. And, that's always something that has inspired me about NIs, that they're always looking for the whys. And so that's something that I've definitely had to train myself to look it from that direction of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That is very interesting. And so if ISFJs are less inclined to look at the why, what is the ISFJ perspective looking at?
So when you mentioned tonality, that's definitely something that I've looked at before. And the assumptions that somebody would take from that tone, or a body language, or especially things for me as far as SI goes, again, with the sameness, like if this has been a repetitive thing that has caused disharmony, then we need to figure out what to do to alter it. So if things usually go down the same road that lead to this conflict, where is the point where we can stop it? So I'm looking more at that have led up to this point, where you seem to be looking at the deeper implications of why this led up to this point.
SI is sameness, but I think it's maybe sameness in a more concrete way, like the same sensory or understanding that part. But I wonder if NI is about like finding similarities and patterns. So even if like the concrete is completely different, where does all these jumbled up SE real-time reel of information point to a same abstract pattern? So I wonder if that might be a point of similarity but difference.
Yeah, because I'm married to an SE person, and so I noticed that with him, he is more focused on like what's going on right now, where my SI is looking at what led up to this point. And so I can see how, like, on the flip side, using NI and SI, they're both pattern recognition processes where they're learning information and creating a pattern from that information, where SI is looking at any sort of past experiences, any prior knowledge about this one situation, or how they can apply a previous situation to the current situation. Excuse me, now I'm going to have throat issues. Sure. NI seems to be looking at implied patterns. X, Y, and Z usually ends up this way. So we've met X and Y, so it's probably going to end in Z based on my predictions, if that makes sense. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that sounds very accurate. Implied patterns. Yeah. Does SI have anything it implies?
I think that I think one of the things that I have to be mindful of is that I don't project past experiences onto current experiences. I can use the information to help me deduce and make decisions based on what I've experienced, but I have to be careful that I recognize that this is a completely new experience. Nothing about this is the same, and therefore shouldn't be treated exactly the same, because this might be a new person, a new experience. This person might have experienced some growth since then, and so it's not fair for me to attribute my own past experience, my own subjective knowledge to this current situation, because I feel like that inhibits growth as well. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, that was lovely. That brings me back to a point. So like with SE, it's kind of like you feel like your experience of the sensory now is divorced from past experiences. So it's interesting how you brought up that you bring the past into the present. It's kind of like SE just deals with the here and now, and it doesn't refer to the past. It's kind of like cut off. It's divorced. It's separated from the past, and it's just taking each new impression as a new one. There's this saying, every time you put your foot into a river, it is a new river. So the particles will hit your foot slightly differently each time you put your foot in the river. So therefore, you're having a slightly different experience, and therefore, it's a new impression every time. And that's how it feels like for SE. It's like taking each new impression as a new one.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very important lesson I've learned from SE. You know, like I said, I'm married to an ISFP, so that's very valuable takeaways there.
Definitely. That is so cool. And I was wondering, Jordan, what's your experience of TI?
I definitely have to. I love TI. It's like my research function. I could research things all day long about any given topic that sparks my interest. I want to know everything there is to know about it, and I will look at multiple resources to find same knowledge. You know, to where all of the dots are lining up and everything is congruent. I also have to be careful with TI though, because as my tertiary function, I know that I can overvalue it and think that it's more developed than it actually is. And so I fear that this sometimes makes me look like a know-it-all, when I probably only have about 75% of accurate information, but I pretend I have 90 or more. um, so yeah, but it is very important for me when I'm getting information that it's vetted through SI as well as TI, that it's credible information coming from reliable sources, but also that I vet it myself. How does this information align with me, what I already know, what I already believe? How does it fit the group dynamic that I'm applying it to? Yeah, so it's a subjective function, so it's going to be personal, and finding personal truths and beliefs. And it's definitely a challenge because as an SI and an Enneagram 1, I'm very prone to following the leader, so to speak. So basically, if you were to tell me something that sounded right, I would probably automatically align with you because I assume you know what you're talking about. So that TI process has to really vet out, does this align with me and my own personal beliefs and what I know personally to be true? So it's interesting.
That is yeah, that is so well explained. Jordan, what are some more differences you see in INFJs and ISFJs?
Okay, so this has definitely been something I've gleaned again from my mom, but also the other INFJs that I've become really close to over the years. This incredible introspection about meaning and I'm getting tongue tied. The deeper implications of things. Like my mom, she sees meaning and purpose in everything. Everything has like an alternate supernatural connotation. Um, and you know, it's very easy for me to get caught up in my everyday life and not really think about those sort of things. I'm just really focused on my tasks or what's going on that I need to tend to right now. But stopping to talk to my mom or other INFJs, I tend to go to INFJs for any sort of like counsel because I know that they're going to like dig really deep into what I'm saying, like reading between the lines kind of thing,
Mhm.
and get me to think on a much deeper level. So I really appreciate that about them.
That's beautiful, Jordan. Yeah, I kind of see intuition is kind of like trying to see the spiritual things are in first that lead to the physical. So it's like, what are these underlying factors that lead to the physical things? But it's like paying more attention to that, the spiritual realm that leads to eventual physicalities. What I mean by that, it sounds really woo-woo, right? But I guess in an example, a mother starts to be angry at her kids and resentful and only love the pets. And so it's kind of like looking at the spiritual causes for that. Like, does she feel neglected in her relationships with her kids? Does she feel taken advantage of? Does she feel guilty for anything? Does she feel like there's anything unresolved? That intuitive inclination might be to look for the unresolved things that are beyond what you can see, like, and you're always jumping to that sometimes too quickly and inferring like meaning there sometimes when it's just a thing. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, growing up with it as part of just my everyday life, I didn't give it enough credit back then, but now I definitely do. And it's definitely something that I've learned to integrate into my own life to where I'm not so quick to discredit those more abstract concepts. I am actually quicker now to apply them than I would the sensory elements, because it is typical for me to attribute representatives to things. Like, for instance, some of the things that you mentioned would be typical things that I would do, like saying, um, this person is sad. Okay, so what led up to her being sad, and trying to read into information that I may not have all of it, but knowing this person's history, I can deduce what I think maybe made her sad. And that sort of thing. But I'm taking cues from her physical representation, um, and things like that. So I've definitely learned how to mesh them together through what I've learned from NI. And granted, I do not do it well, because it's not a developed function for me. But I think it speaks to the beauty of learning to glean from other people that use other functions more developed.
I liked when you mentioned SI and history, so I wondered if you could go a bit into that, because I see SI as like gleaning gold nuggets from the person's history, because it knows that a person's past really affects them. With NI, I think I'm indifferent to that. So it's like if it plays an important role, then I will determine that. But if it doesn't, then I'm generally indifferent to a person's past history and what that led up to.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that a person's individual history plays a huge part in their future growth. I think that if there's too many things in their past that haven't been dealt with or resolved, then it's impossible for them to move forward and improve in the things that they are trying to improve. Um,
Mhm.
for me personally, I have so much intricate detail about my past. And I don't know if that's the same for all SI people, but for me, I definitely have very vivid memories as far back as 2 years old. Um, and I in chronological order. So it's very strange to me. But I also always kept records of things. I've been a huge memorabilia collector ever since I was little. Journals and anything that marks a presence of time.
That is so beautiful. I guess, do you have photo albums then? Like a lot of photo albums.
Yeah, I
Wow.
do. I do. Although the more technology we integrate into our lives, the less physical photo albums I have, which is something uh, I'm trying to get back to, because I used to love scrapbooking and things like that. But obviously now with technology, it's less convenient to do that. But journals were always very big for me growing up. I have journals. I think I started my first journal when I was like 10 or 9, something like that. And I still have them today, all of them. And they're very important to me, looking forward to like the future and my kids being able to have those one day, and like relate to me on some level from that age in their life or something like that.
That's amazing. I was thinking about your saving the timestamps. That's really interesting when you mentioned the word chronological. It's very like sensory to remember things happening in a chronological way. It's what we learn in our certification as an MBTI practitioner, that with sensing, you remember the facts as they occurred, so the order in which they occurred too. Whereas intuitives will kind of arrange it by the order of the most interesting idea. So it's like, this sparks an interesting idea, so we'll put that in front and then we'll arrange it like that.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah.
When you remember something from the past, I was wondering what you specifically remember. For me, what I remember from the past is how an idea evolves from the past. So how how something has contributed to an evolution is something I consider, but it's not like, I don't start there. I kind of start with the present thing, and then I try to trace back its evolution, which may or may not have to do with its past. So I was wondering if you relate, if you don't relate.
I can definitely see some things in my life where it's happened like that, where I'll realize something, a milestone maybe that I've met, and wondering how I got to that point, and then I can trace it backwards. But for the most part, I think as I've reminisced on my past so much, I can see how one event led to another, led to another, led to another, and then, oh, that's why this thing is how it is now. And so I guess it's kind of more in reverse.
Cool. So you would say that you reverse understand implications, or you forward understand implications? Is that abstract?
No, I understand. I definitely understand what you're talking about. I'm trying to think if it's relevant for me. I think, like I said, I think in some cases it has been that way. The more growth I experience and the more into my intuitive functions I try to become, by nature, I think it's just more from me thinking about a memory and then realizing how it affected my growth today, or somewhere else in the past, and things that I learned from that experience.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I'm trying to think about how it relates back to me. Um, and I guess like for me, I'm less inclined to reference concrete memories, or if at all, sometimes. It's kind of detached to me. I don't know why I keep saying that word. It's almost like it feels detached because I use it as a form of analysis rather than as a sentimental thing. So it's almost like, if I look at it from a cliff's edge, like, what is this telling me about the whys of something? And if I'm not able to glean that, then I become indifferent to it. Or even as I don't even know how to explain it. So it's like my brain is constantly searching for the why, and that's the most important thing. And everything else it has a shred of indifference. So that means every physical thing that surrounds me feels a little bit indifferent to me, because unless I see it linking back to a central why, I will not see it as that important. And then I'll just feel kind of detached to it. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And to use the same analogy of the cliff, I would relate my experience to climbing up the cliff from like the valley below going upward, and then meeting milestones along the way, or markers, I guess what you could say. Um, and I go back over experiences over and over and over again to try to find new emerging information, and try to find the implications in that, and what it evolved into along the way. So I guess you looking over the cliff, I see myself looking up the cliff and trying to travel the path upwards. I don't know if
But
that was a really poor use of analogy, but that's my best go.
no, that makes a lot of sense. It's like you start with the details and then you climb the cliff to get to the big picture. But I think
Yes,
intuitives start with the big picture and they have to figure out the details.
exactly. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so it's all about the order in which you do something. So everyone does everything, but we have like a natural inclination or like a magnetism to choose
Mhm.
a certain way first.
Yes.
Cool. Um, and I want to ask you a bit about your INFJ mom and some differences you saw between you and her. Yeah.
I'm really, really close to my mom. As the oldest child, you know, a lot of responsibility fell on me to kind of be her right hand. And very, very, very early on, I noticed that she seemed disconnected, or what's the word that you had used?
Detached?
Detached, yes. I felt like she was very detached from reality. And of course, I was too young to really understand any of that until, you know, I started learning about type and then it all made sense. But there would be lots of times where I would get really disgruntled with her lack of presence and seeming really untethered to things. You know, you could be talking to her, and in mid sentence, she would just leave the room. And you're like, what happened? And then she would come back and she would apologize because she knew that what she did was like considered rude or whatever. And I just always thought that was so strange. Or she would be in the middle of reading and she would get up to go in her room and she would just shut the door and be there for a while. um, I homeschooled myself primarily all through high school because I was just very studious and disciplined to do that, I guess. And she was very happy to relinquish that responsibility to me because she felt like it was very hard for her to stay focused and present. But there were so many things now looking back, I realized what she was doing. She was going through a conflict. And so she would go into a quiet space to really try to refresh herself and things like that. Or she would have a thought in the middle of another thought in the middle of what you were talking about. And she didn't know how to like make all those pieces match up. So the only thing to do was to leave and then come back. You know, it was almost like break away and then retether kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, so yeah, just some things like that that were just differences between the two of us. Um, she would always say how she admired my ability to keep a schedule, even from a really young age. She was very indifferent to time, would lose track of time very easily, and wouldn't know how to get it back, and things like that. Um, but now, things that I really value about her presence is that anytime you're talking about something abstract or really deep and emotional, she is there 100%. She is focused and she is completely in tune with you. And I think that that's just because it breaks away from the everyday norm conversations about just, you know, mundane life. And it goes to something much more rooted and meaningful. And so she is definitely my go to on conversations like that. Sharing TI, we geek out over, you know, WebMD and like all these different kinds of things that take research, and we're both science nuts. We love anatomy and physiology and biology and things like that. So yeah.
Well, I'm so happy you have such a strong relationship with your mother.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely taken purposeful and conscious removal of my own state of mind to try to adapt to hers.
Yeah, interesting. So, where would you say is the biggest sort of conflict in an INFJ ISFJ relationship?
Okay, so one of my best friends is an INFJ, and we were not very close for about 2 or 3 years, and I never really quite understood why. And I realized later that it was because most everything that I could think of because I'm a really good small talker. I can fill space really easy with just regular everyday details, conversation. And she couldn't for some reason. And I never understood why until I started learning type. And then it all made sense that, okay, I've got to dig deeper. If I want to have any sort of like real solid relationship with her, I'm going to have to find something really meaningful and purposeful to connect with her about. And so, yeah, so we started talking philosophy and psychology and spirituality and theology, and there it was. So I definitely think that one of the biggest inhibitors of relationships between sensors and intuitives is definitely going to be their own personal limitations for their preferences of interest. And I think that it takes getting outside of your own bubble, if you will, your own preferences, your own interests, your own hobbies, to really reach that other person where they are and connect with them on their level in order to really get a good and grounded relationship.
Yeah, that's so true about how I have difficulty with small talk about just day-to-day things. It's almost like with intuitives, they selectively take parts of reality that let them ideate more further, if that makes sense. So they
Mhm.
can't take in everything of the world, but they're more of does this spur a thought about psychology, about philosophy? And if it doesn't, there is a level of indifference to it. Or maybe it's just me and I have some weird thing.
I think that that tends to be the case for specifically NI. I'm not sure if it's so much the case for NE, but no, I definitely hear you.
Another thing with NI is like Megan Lavoda, a way that she differentiates intuition and sensing is that, do you start out with the complicated in order to understand the simple, or do you
Mm-hmm.
start out with the simple in order to understand the complicated? So
Mm-hmm.
intuitives, their natural tendency is they need to understand it in its complexity in order to understand anything simple. So it's kind of like, to understand a specific way of how to do something, they have to understand the complexity of how it fits into a bigger why before they can understand it in any simple way. So it's like, it's almost like we cannot absorb it until we get the why. So that's why we need it so much, because it's the primary thing for anything to go into our minds. It has to pass the why in order for anything to stick. With the sensing quality, it seems like they can, or you guys can understand it simply first, even without needing to understand the why, but still absorb it. That's like an actual talent, because it's like you can understand the simple and then work your way to the complex, which makes more sense. Like, this seems like an easier way to go. Like, not an easier way, but like it's
I
like a
think, yeah, I think our world has kind of made it seem like that that's an easier way to learn things. But I think it also has its struggles too, because we do struggle to see the bigger picture, and the more complexities of things, and we almost get comfortable in the surface level. And I think that's a really dangerous place to stay, especially if you're talking about personal development and growth, because anything that's not complex, not challenging, it's not going to, you're not going to improve anything. But I do feel like that our world, our society is created for sensors, because it's easier.
but it's also, it seems like the intuitive way. Like it seems like it makes more sense to understand something simply and then complexly, instead
Mhm.
of doing it the other way around, which is complex to simple. That's like, it kind of seems like intuitives are making it harder on themselves than it has to be.
Maybe. I definitely think there's pros and cons with each one, but I love that distinction, or that description rather, of the two. I think that that makes perfect sense and definitely resonates with me as a sensor, um, and aligns with what I know of intuitives as well. So,
That's so cool. And I guess I want to ask you, okay, one more question. If you were to see someone right now and you had to tie break between an INFJ and an ISFJ, what would you look for when considering which one of these types that they are?
hmm, okay. Um, are you talking about, say, like in an interview, or just a normal interaction, or what sort of context?
Yeah, I guess in an interview or in an interaction. We'll do
Okay.
both.
Okay. An everyday interaction, like say at the grocery store or something, might be a little bit more difficult. I feel like sensors are probably, like I said, easier at small talk and just normal, hey, how you doing? It's been a while since I've seen you, kind of conversation. And intuitives might be a little bit more hesitant or not as focused, or might have trouble thinking about how they want to answer. Um, if I was doing an interview, I would probably look more for like how long it takes them to answer a question, or I feel like sensors want to understand the question more like securely and really understand like if they're understanding the wording correctly. Where intuitives will just fill in the blanks, and they will already assume what the person was intending through their question. Um, and also their threshold for more abstract concepts. Sensors will normally have to ask for clarification for more abstract types of questions, where intuitives tend to be able to pick up on that really easily, really quickly. Um, yeah, and how much weight they can hold with certain topics. Can intuitives hold for a long time, just normal everyday conversation about like your dogs and your job and that kind of thing? And can sensors hold a conversation long about more abstract concepts like theology and psychology and the weather and how the weather works and that kind of thing? Yeah, so those would be little hints, but I would definitely still have to vet it out.
That's so amazing. And something you mentioned to me before is that, like, with ISFJs, they're more likely to refer to a past example, like a concrete example, to prove a point, whereas like intuitives tend to refer to like a conceptual idea to prove a
Mhm.
point. And you're like, that's how you were able to tell the person you were profiling before was like an ISFJ instead of an INFJ.
I definitely look for the type of verbiage they use, if they're very methodical and using a lot of analogies and metaphors and things like that, versus like most of the things I've referenced, I'll pick something from my own personal life or history or experience to kind of contrast it with. So I definitely see these as clues to sensor versus intuitives.
Interesting. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think they're very like smart ways of picking up on a person's speech pattern, whether or not they're sensor or intuitive, where the intuitive will describe things in a more abstract way, and sensors may provide like an actual real life example.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if
Yeah.
this is just SI or I noticed a lot of SE people do it too, but when they're giving information, they will start at one end and they'll fill in with a lot of details. Where intuitives tend to like ebb and flow in and out of a storyline. They might start in the middle and then like work their way back towards the beginning and then move back towards the middle. Where I feel like sensors tend to stay more like point A, B, C, D, and like maybe not necessarily chronological, but still in that same time frame of a storyline.
That's so cool. I wonder if like intuitives are kind of indifferent to the time frame, which is why they ebb and flow between the
Yeah.
beginning, middle, end, because it's not the time that they're focusing on. They're focusing on the idea that that thing represents. So then they're
Mhm.
going out of order because they want to illustrate that idea in its full maximum capacity instead of conveying the facts correctly or like
Mhm.
in clearly, I
Mhm.
should say.
And I think both are very keen on details. Sensory sensors more on sensory details, obviously, and then intuitives more on the implication details and more inflections and dress ups that they think might benefit the storyline or give more description and more feeling to it.
That is so cool. Thank you so much, Jordan, for illustrating that. It was so lovely to have you on. Like I said, Jordan is, a lovely human being. She has a voice of a literal angel. Like her voice is so nice to listen to. Like it sounds like so
Aw.
melodic and so pure and so angelic. I keep calling it angelic, but it's literally like your voice sounds like the textbook melodic voice. And I was like, wow,
Aw,
that is a
thank
gorgeous
you.
voice. I but yeah, you're also a very kind person. And like when you care about your personality hacker family. So basically me and Jordan are classmates in the personality hacker profiler training. And like you care about your classmates like they're your family, and you make everyone have a sense of community, and you like preserve the community that's so important to all of us. And like I'm so thankful for that. So like thank you for being, just the caregiver of our hearts, because
Aw.
that's
Okay, now you
amazing.
are gonna have to shut it down because I'm ah, that is so sweet. Thank you.
But yeah, it was nice talking to you. I know, like, I hope everyone is staying safe during these times, and that if you like this video, like and subscribe, and also check Jordan out in the links below. And bye, guys.